Newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Cross Question, your weekly political panel debate show on LBC. Don't forget, you can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on our YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. Lots and lots of people do like watching as well as listening, and we have four beautiful people with us in the studio today. We have Harriet Baldwin, Conservative MP for West Worcestershire, former Treasury Minister; Nia Griffith, Labour MP for Llanelli. Yep, excellent. And Shadow Defence Secretary Matt Tedford is actor, and he's got a new show soon called Sequins and Lies, but many of you may know him from his starring role in Margaret Thatcher, Queen of Soho. And another diva in the studio, Dean Godson, is Director of Policy Exchange. They're here to take your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Mark, who's in Sevenoaks. Hello, Mark.
Hi. I'd like to ask if Sajid Javid is the best qualified Chancellor we've ever had, or indeed any country has ever had.
Wow, that's quite that. Now we're all thinking of all the different chancellors that have been in this country. I think Gordon Brown would probably say that he would lay claim to that title. Nia Griffith, I've had stolen your answer there.
Well, I think you rather have, actually, because I think we have huge respect for Gordon Brown and what he did over the many, many years in government, and the fact that when there was a world financial crisis, there we were, the UK, on the world stage, saying this is what we need to do so that things don't get even worse. And certainly his record is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think the issue about Sajid Javid, no doubt he'll be writing a book about it at some stage, but I think the worry when we saw what happened there was that grab of power by number 10, potentially a change of direction. I don't think anyone would complain too much if there were a slight change of direction, but I think it's that power grab which is most worrying, and you worry about what further power grabs we might be going to see.
I suppose also underlying the question is whether people who are appointed to cabinet positions need to have experience in that particular area, because we have had chancellors over the years who've probably not had very much financial experience that have been quite successful. I'm now trying to rapidly think of one. Harriet, can you think of one?
Well, I'm just thinking that Sajid was very well qualified, not only in terms of what he'd done professionally, but also, of course, in terms of his backstory, and a father who'd come here with £1 in his pocket, and that Sajid had really worked his way up both in the private sector and then in the public sector as well. But, of course, Rishi Sunak is also incredibly well qualified, and I think probably both of them, to answer your question directly, probably both of them are some of the best qualified people that have ever been in that role. And certainly, I think have more relevant qualifications than many of the chancellors we've had in the history of this country.
I mean, you worked under George Osborne in the Treasury.
I did.
He had absolutely no qualification for the job, did he?
He certainly hadn't worked in the financial services sector. He had, amazing political CV.
And did you work with Sajid in the Treasury?
I don't think we ever crossed over in the Treasury, but of course he's a Worcestershire MP and I'm a Worcestershire MP as well. So I know him very closely from the patch on the ground.
Would you have done what he did if that situation had been put to you? Would you have resigned?
It's really hard to say, isn't it? Because it's so difficult to put yourself in that position. I don't know the advisors in question. I've never met the famous Mr. Cummings. And
me neither.
So I just don't know is the answer. I think that, what he set out today in the Commons was very clear in terms of his preference for lower taxes. And he made a very salient point, which is it's actually only the Treasury that can cut taxes, because all the other departments will always have spending pressure. And at the end of the day, governments don't have money. It's just money that comes from you, the taxpayer.
Tony in London says no chancellor is better than Gladstone. Even I'm not that old to remember Gladstone. Matt Tedford, what do you make of Sajid Javid, and do you think he is the most qualified chancellor we've ever had?
Surely if he was the most qualified chancellor we've ever had, he'd still be doing the job, because they wouldn't have let him go. I mean, very honourable for him to resign, and I do agree that he needed to. I don't think it's fair. I think that the number 10 and number 11 need to be kept separate, and I think it's very worrying that Boris Johnson and his advisers have been muscling in on people. I mean, these are unelected officials, that these Dominic Cummings and his backstage people. I think it's very worrying that the Treasury's being taken over by number 10, and that this isn't a Prime Minister. Like, Boris Johnson is not the Prime Minister. He can't just pick and choose.
Well, he is.
President. He isn't President, I should say. But he is also doing very well so far.
No, you are. He is First Lord of the Treasury, and that's what people often forget in this, that the Prime Minister has that title too. So does that not entitle him to say, look, I've seen what happened with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and with various Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. I don't want there to be this split between number 10 and number 11.
I mean, but isn't it... But they are not elected. These are not the people that we elected. These are people that come in, are hired by the Prime Minister. These are not hired by everybody within the party. These are just coming from number 10. I think that is worrying.
OK, Dean Godson.
Qualification...
Can you get...
Am I close enough? Sorry. Qualification for being Chancellor. Roy Jenkins, a very successful Chancellor, not obviously qualified, a great biographer, but by common consent was deemed. Jim Callaghan, very unsuccessful, but very political too in that job, and obviously in the devaluation of the pound. Geoffrey Howe, an outstanding Chancellor. So there have been some pretty good ones. Brown's record exceeds all others for longevity. There can be a debate on some of what he did, but clearly he imprinted himself on that building. Look, it's a bit like with arts ministers. It's always said by people in the arts that the worst arts ministers are those who know something about the arts. The Ministry of Defence despairs of people who've done a few years on a short service commission, and they then tell the generals that they know everything about how to run it. So the question is, by what measurement do we mean qualification? Sajid had an important career in financial services, and now, as rightly been said, he's fallen afoul of politics. It's about the personalities. What should not be lost here is that in the post-Brexit era, the impact of Brexit upon the whole idea of what is possible in the economic space. All this debate on fiscal rules, the gaps between them are perhaps not that big. But what is possible now post-Brexit in terms of setting our own spending levels and moving beyond the straitjacket of what was imposed by EU, that is common to all sections of the Conservative Party and perhaps between political parties in some ways.
I also think there's a wider point about decision-making. So I think that cabinets should appear to be very united in public, but I think there needs to be space in private for there to be disagreement and challenge. And I think this whole change last week rather went to the heart of that, as to whether there is going to be the space where people who are now members of the cabinet feel comfortable having disagreements and challenges with number 10.
You were a minister for a long time during the Cameron and May governments. You're not a minister in Boris Johnson's government. Do you think that he has effectively got rid of all of the people who supported Jeremy Hunt in the leadership campaign? I can't now think of a single one that is in any meaningful position in the government, and that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, actually, some people were brought back in. So Vicky Ford, who was very involved in Jeremy Hunt's campaign, she was appointed a minister. James Brokenshire was brought back into government.
He supported
Penny Mordaunt.
He supported Boris Johnson.
Penny Mordaunt. Then perhaps I'm wrong on James.
No, but I'm thinking in the top levels that there really aren't anybody. And I mean, people when you were dropped, people were saying very kind things about you, saying, well, how can he drop someone like Harriet Baldwin that everybody thought was a really good minister, and yet you're now on the back benches?
We have a fantastically talented Conservative Party, 365 wonderful people on our benches.
Right, let's just finish off this question by asking you all for your best Chancellor ever. Nia.
Gordon Brown.
Gordon Brown, easy one for you. Harriet.
I think, seeing what George Osborne did, taking the deficit from 10% of our national income and having the political...
George Osborne better than Lloyd George, better than Gladstone, better than Geoffrey Howe, Nigel Lawson?
I'm not a historian, but I think what Gordon Brown did that I will acknowledge is make the Bank of England independent, and I think that's done a lot to improve the soundness of money in this country and to make sure that, as we sit here today, inflation is around that 2% mark.
Matt.
It would be Gordon Brown.
Somebody says here, how will we know if Matt on the panel is giving an honest opinion or if he's acting?
Oh, well, that's true. I mean, but these are also politicians, so how can we tell if they're giving honest opinions?
Oh, cutting. Dean?
Geoffrey Howe, for what he did in opposition and in government in that first Thatcher term, has to be the hegemonic Chancellor of the post-war era. 0345 6060 973. Lots to ask our panel about today. Coronavirus, floods, the historic inquiry into child sex abuse, which reported yesterday, the rows between Michel Barnier and Number 10 about the free trade agreement, maybe, or the Labour leadership. That's taken on. It's been a little bit more interesting, I think, over the last few days. We'll come to your calls in just a moment. Let's go to a slightly early break at 13 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
If you started your own furniture store today, you might not call it Fishpools. But if it was $18.99 and your name was Ernest Fishpool, well, it actually was. And he actually did. These days, Fishpools in Waltham Cross is one of the largest furniture stores in the southeast, with a stunning range of on-trend designs. There's up to 50% off in our winter sale, but only until Sunday. See it all in-store and at fishpools.co.uk. That's a website, Ernest?
Will the retirement you get be the retirement you want? Check your state pension and see how you can build on it with a workplace or other pension. Get to know your pension at yourpension.gov.uk.
A change is coming. Millions of people across the UK are realising that if their broadband's out of contract, they could be out of pocket. So it's time to switch and save with Vodafone Superfast Broadband for £21.95 a month. Join the Great British Broadband switch today. The future's exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
18-month contract subject to credit check. Publicly available out of contract, non-promotional pricing. Superfast 1, 73% of customers receive sync speeds above 35 megabits per second. See vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
When travelling from central London to the heart of Edinburgh, what's best? A plane or an LNER train? Well, there's a massive queue at the airport, so 1-0 trains. Free Wi-Fi on board? 2-0. Oh, and travelling with us is on average £35 cheaper than flying. Hat trick. It looks like the LNER train is the winner. So, book direct and find out more at lner.co.uk/air savings. Savings based on cheapest available fares.
What van carries over a tonne? What van has class-leading fuel economy? What van? The answer's in the question. The What Van Light Van of the Year 2020. The Vauxhall Combo Cargo. Limited stock now available for only £199 a month and £199 initial rental, excluding 20% VAT on a 2-year lease. Other rental periods available. Search Combo Cargo offer and hurry down to your local retailer. Vauxhall carries British business. Business users only. Initial rental of £198.98 plus 23 months at £198.98. Contract hire on Combo Cargo Edition L1 1.5 Turbo D 100 PS. 20,000 total contracted miles. Limited availability subject to status. T's and C's 18 plus. Price excludes 20% VAT. You will not own the vehicle. Vauxhall Finance PLC. Trading as free to move lease.
High quality, affordable kitchens designed in your own home. That's Room Sense.
That's Room Sense.
Book your free Room Sense home design visit and we'll measure up, show you samples, create a stunning kitchen design and give you a quote all before we leave.
Quality at a price you can afford. That's Room Sense.
Book today at roomsense.co.uk.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
16 minutes past 8. Odie on a text says, how come no one complimented Gordon Brown for avoiding the single currency? I'm very, very happy to compliment him for that and have said so many times.
I was about to say he kept us out of the euro, but...
well, Boris has done that permanently now, I suppose. Right, let's go to your next question. And if you've got a question for our panel, 0345 6060 973. Harriet Baldwin, Nia Griffith, Matt Tedford and Dean Godson with me. Adnan is in Luton. Hello, Adnan.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Hi, not too bad. What's your question?
So my question is, obviously, it's regarding the flooding and everything. And to the panel, I'd ask, irrespective of whichever government has been in power, we know that certain areas within the UK have been susceptible to flooding. Why has not enough flood defences been put in place so that people's can be better protected against natural disasters, weather conditions as such?
OK, good question. Let's go to you, Harriet Baldwin, because you're MP for West Worcestershire. We know that's an area that has got quite a lot of floods at the moment. What do you make of what Adnan says? Because it's a criticism that a lot of people are making.
It's a really good question, Adnan. And we, in West Worcestershire, we have the River Severn that flows right through. So we've got Upton upon Severn, and we've got the flow south of Worcester, where it meets the Avon. We've also got the River Teme, so Tenbury Wells, that got very badly flooded last Sunday. Since 2010, though, we have built 6 new permanent flood defence schemes. So there are many, many more homes that are protected in West Worcestershire than there were before, but there are still more schemes that I want to see built. So I'm pleased that there is a pipeline of funding. I think there's something like £4 billion allocated in the next spending review period, and I shall certainly be trying to do my bit to make sure that some of that gets built in West Worcestershire. But you're absolutely right that these events are happening more frequently. I think as a country we need to continue to invest in not only permanent flood defences but also just resilience. So one of the things that's been striking this time is how well the police and the fire brigade and the Environment Agency and the local councils have all worked together, and they've had a command structure that's really worked well with some of the river rescue as well. So we are more resilient than we were before. It feels like we've made progress, but we're certainly not there yet.
Why hasn't the Prime Minister visited a single flood area?
Well, I was myself of the opinion that given that the roads are virtually impassable, that to have a Prime Minister rocking up with Wellington boots and all of the security detail that comes with that in the middle of the crisis would not be ideal. And I would love him to come once things have died down, and he can come and thank all the amazing men and women who've helped with this emergency response.
Matt Tedford, does that wash with you?
Not really, no. I mean, when's it going to die down? I think that's the issue. And for people, I mean, there's a lot... People get a lot out of seeing the Prime Minister. Whether he's actually doing anything by being there is another matter. But I think for a lot of people who are living through these floods and are living through these crises, and to see the Prime Minister come along and actually see it for himself and not on the TV, and to actually be a part of it, I think would be quite valuable for a lot of people. But I think the bigger question we have with a lot of these things is this is going to get worse. We've had a lot of things in the newspaper about extreme weather. It's not just a British issue, it's something that's going on around the world. And yes, more money should be spent on flood prevention. It should be spent on a lot of things to do with the environment. And it happens every year when we have snow. Every year when we have snow, we have a little bit of snow, and there's always that conversation of why don't we better prepare for it? Why don't we do this? Why don't we have, why do schools always...
Keeps me in work, that kind of conversation.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of issues, and there's a lot of sort of knee-jerk reactions when these extreme weather conditions happen. And I think we need to be careful that we don't spend ridiculous amounts of money and panic as a result of this extreme weather. But we do need to look at the fact that this extreme weather is going to get worse, and it's going to be a national issue that we need to discuss about the environment, not just flood prevention, but we need to look at it in bigger strokes.
Dean Godson, the government, whatever it spends on flood defences, can never actually spend enough, can it? It is the sort of thing where you can never actually protect every property that needs protecting. But one thing they could do is to stop building on floodplains, because still housing estates are being built in areas that are liable to flooding.
You're absolutely right to raise the issue. I think it was interesting Adnan used the word flood defences. I think a few years ago that was a quite unfashionable phrase in the world of the Environment Agency. It was about flood risk management. It was held that flooding couldn't be, or perhaps even shouldn't be, stopped everywhere as part of management. Why I mention it is because there's a very big issue here. Politicians, like with the NHS, in the public view, have responsibility for the NHS, but actually they don't. NHS England has a lot of the power and the implementation. And it's the same with the Environment Agency. There's been a real tendency over the last 25 years, plus maybe, certainly since the time of John Major's government, started in a major way, in a heavy-duty way, by the Major government, of agentification, of turning things over to non-departmental public bodies, quangos, whatever you want to call them. And politicians are forced to have responsibility of it whilst having relatively little control. And there needs, I think we should start a debate, perhaps, on the nature of the Environment Agency's powers, what the nature of political accountability there is, and actually, how and where do we want to direct the funding to go, in terms of crisis-ridden areas. And that's one thing which I think has been, this is not a party political issue in that sense. There are many members of the Labour Party, John Speller and others, are concerned about this sort of level of agentification, the diminution of political control. Not political control so much, but accountability. And I think it's an interesting dimension of the debate we haven't heard yet.
It's very interesting. You look at the Highways Agency and everyone imagines that the Secretary of State for Transport, you were Shadow Transport Secretary, were you not? Have I imagined that?
No.
I have imagined that then. Obviously,
that was me.
Obviously a fantasy of mine. But you look at the Highways Agency and the Secretary of State for Transport, people think is in control of the roads, and he isn't at all. Certainly not the highways. And then, of course, local councils have control of all of the others.
Don't get me started.
I've got to take issue with you there, Iain.
Go on then.
Because ultimately politicians do have responsibility. We have responsibility for funding. And let's be absolutely clear, the Environment Agency has been hollowed out. There have been massive cuts. Why? Because it's invisible. People don't see the problems about flood defences until it's too late. First and foremost, now what we need to do for people is get help in there straight away. You feel so abandoned when your house has been devastated. So first and foremost that. But secondly, the Pitt report came out over 12 years ago now in response to flooding, and there are recommendations there which are not being fully implemented. And we do need to get back on the front foot, fund flood defences properly. But more than that, obviously, as Dean's already mentioned, not making the problem worse by exacerbating the amount of development in particularly sensitive areas. But then we have this World Climate conference coming in November to Glasgow. We should be taking a real lead, because let's be absolutely clear about this. If it's bad here, believe you me, what it's going to be like in coastal areas around the globe is absolutely, this is just a tiny speck of that. So we have got to get on the front foot on the climate change issue as well. But there is no excuse for rolling back on the flood defence programme.
Harriet, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't get me started on how difficult it is to engage with the Highways Agency. I have had that trouble, but I have found the Environment Agency actually really, really helpful. And as I said, 6 new schemes built in my patch. I really can't complain for the level of service that we've had from the Environment Agency. 2 points, though, that flood defence spending is cumulative. So, we have grown the amount that we have protected across the country. I think then we're now at 200,000 homes are now protected that weren't 10 years ago, and I think there's another 300,000 in the pipeline. So it is a cumulative thing. But to Dean's point, house building is also cumulative, and one of the things that you really have to look out for, particularly in a rural area like mine, is making sure that all of the new homes are being built with these sustainable urban drainage systems. So basically a big pond or pool in the middle of the development, because otherwise the cumulative amount of housing that goes onto our green fields and other areas that would have absorbed some of the water coming from the sky can be really quite detrimental.
But isn't the truth, and this is what I suspect people actually do want to hear from politicians, the truth is you're always chasing your tail, because you can have a flooding in one area one year and then you do something about that area, but you don't do anything about the area that might be flooded the next year, because you don't know that it's going to be flooded. So you're always playing catch-up.
Well, it's not exactly true, because if you look at the rain we've had over the past 6 months, I mean, everybody knows that the ground has been absolutely saturated. I mean, Harriet is at the bottom end of the Severn. We know what was happening up the top end of it. We've been seeing, so quite frankly, we do have the modelling. We do know a lot of this, and we can be putting in a lot of the defences. And the other thing that we've absolutely got to do is help people with reinsuring their properties, because that's where they really get hit. They get hit with horrendous premiums because they've had a flood. And the government does need to step in there and make sure that we have a decent, what we call insurance reprogram.
Can I come in as a flood geek? There are 2 types of flood defences. River flooding, which you can protect against, but the very, very intense rainfall, you never know where that's going to fall.
OK, right, let's move on. Adnan, thank you very much for that question. 0345 6060 973. The lines are still open for any questions that you'd like to put to our panel. Ben's in Clacton. Ben, what's your question?
Well, the question is, I'm an ex-trade unionist, and I know how people have got to survive on low-paid salaries. And the increase in zero-hours contracts, in fact, the government in the Dole office tell people if you don't take a zero-hours contract, then you'll lose your support. Now, they take a zero-hours contract, and then, of course, if something like this comes along and they were told to self-isolate...
You mean coronavirus?
With no money... What are they going to do? They're not going to ring 111. They're going to just persevere and end up spreading it more than they would in normal circumstances.
So what's your question?
Well, the question is, what do we do in that sort of situation? Do we support these people? They can't even go and sign on again because they're not told not to go anywhere. So what are they supposed to do in a situation that increases maybe tenfold in this country as far as self-isolation is concerned? It's all right saying it, but the practicalities of it, you've got the working poor who are 2 salaries away from poverty. What are they supposed to do?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that question. Let's widen that out a bit because that's quite specific. But essentially, should there be more protection for 0 hours contract workers if the coronavirus really hits this country in a bad way? Let's widen that out a little bit, as well as answering the question to say, well, are we actually prepared? And have we got any idea what would happen if there really was a big epidemic in this country? Dean Godson.
Well, so far, the thing has not been very partisan. It's not been divisive. There's been a sensible, consensual debate in this country on how we should respond, schools and so on. It's been non-hysterical. And there will be cases such as been raised by the caller now, where people who are in exceptionally difficult circumstances. We did a seminar about a year and a half ago on the general question of loneliness in society, and self-evidently there will be isolated persons in isolated communities who are going to be having a very big time, and a very difficult time, and it will be up to the authorities, in remote areas, elderly people and so on, to ensure that where people, have come into contact, of course, in a tremendous number of cases, the more isolated people are, the less chance there is of them having come into contact and spreading. But at the bottom end of the pay scale, which is, I think, what the caller was referring to, we're going to need to look in great detail at how, the effects on them can be palliated. There's, of course, one of the great things post-Brexit is, of course, we can start setting our own levels of pay and other forms of employment law that will either raise levels of protections or reduce them.
I don't think the EU had any influence on pay, did it? That's news to me if it did.
No, but I'm talking about employment law.
No, employment law, fine, but the EU didn't set pay levels, no. Nia?
Well, I think first and foremost, there is a real scourge of 0 hours contracts. I mean, let's be absolutely clear about this. The decisions are being made by people who are on regular salaries, who have pensions and who have fully paid up national insurance contributions, and they just do not realise the horrendous risk, as the caller has said, 2 wage packets away from basically absolute poverty, not being able to pay any bills, getting into debt, going into payday lenders and so forth, and the real issue for us is that we need to make sure that work pays, that there is a decent level of wage going into each household for the work that they're doing, plus that they have a decent number of hours of work, that people have a regular pattern of work so that they then know what they're going to earn, they then know what they can borrow if they need to borrow some money to buy something, and they also need to make sure that they are getting those national insurance contributions properly paid, because we know employers are trying to escape from that as well by the use of these contracts. So I think there is a real issue, and I think this is something we absolutely must tackle. Nobody should be working for nothing in this country, which is effectively what's happening.
Well, nobody's working for nothing, but
it works out almost like that. By the time you pay for your gear, you pay for your own self-insurance and all the rest of the things that happen to these people.
But you're making out as if sort of there's huge numbers of people in this country on 0 hours contracts.
Yeah, there are.
Well, do you know what percentage of people in the workplace are on 0 hours contracts?
I can't give you the exact percentage.
Well, I can. It's 2%. And a lot of people on 0 hours contracts actually want to be on 0 hours contracts. You've got students, you've got single mothers who actually think that they like them.
I think the picture's bigger than this, because if you look at people who are working for agencies, for example, I mean, we've had a campaign with some trade unions to try to increase the number of workers who are on permanent role, whereas you find actually now it's 20-30% are agency workers. What happens? The agency takes a cut, the wages are much lower, the insecurity is there, and you're literally last in, first out again. Okay. So it's many forms, this issue of employment insecurity.
We have to go to the news, so we'll hear from Harriet and Matt on this question after the news. It's 8:32. Serena Farrow has the LBC News headlines.
The NHS is looking to extend home testing for coronavirus, and there'll also be a new public information campaign. The Health Secretary's also urged schools not to close unless they've had a confirmed case. Emergency legislation blocking the automatic early release of terror offenders has now become law. Around 50 inmates are expected to spend longer behind bars. And people living along the River Severn are being warned of flooding lasting through to Sunday. There are severe warnings in place for Iron Bridge after temporary flood barriers were overwhelmed by water earlier. People have been evacuated from their homes as a result. LBC weather: wintry showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, rain and sleet sweeping eastwards across England and Wales, and a low of -4 degrees.
This is LBC.
LBC, together with Transport for London, are looking into the issue of air pollution in the capital, one of the most significant challenges facing inner and outer London. This week, Nick Ferrari spoke to Hannah, a Londoner who recently made the switch to a more sustainable way of travelling.
Both my fiancé and I invested in a bike.
Right.
Wanted to get fit and cycle to work, and also it's a really lovely commute.
Watch the full interview and find out how you can help clean up London's air at lbc.co.uk.
Keep coming. Yeah, bit more.
At Hey Car, you'll find the best used cars all in one place. Every car is quality checked and comes with a warranty. So finding your perfect used car is easy. You just need somewhere to park it.
Back. Whoa. Yeah, great. Stop.
To find your perfect used car, search Hey Car.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
I read Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Our big winter sale with our lowest prices ever ends this Sunday. So for solid hardwood furniture with huge savings and our lowest prices ever on some great products, don't miss the Oak Furnitureland Big Winter Sale. Online and in-store. Ends Sunday.
Pets in a Pickle have your pets covered with pet insurance policies as unique as they are. Visit petsinApickle.co.uk.
A change is coming. Millions of people across the UK are realising that if their broadband's out of contract, they could be out of pocket. So it's time to switch and save with Vodafone Superfast Broadband for £21.95 a month. Join the Great British Broadband switch today. The future's exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
18-month contract subject to credit check. Publicly available out of contract, non-promotional pricing. Superfast 1, 73% of customers receive sync speeds above 35 megabits per second. See vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
At 25 to 9 on LBC. You can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, Facebook page or Twitter feed or YouTube channel. We are with Dean Godson from Policy Exchange, Conservative MP Harriet Baldwin, Labour MP Nia Griffith and the actor Matt Tedford. We're talking about Ben in Clacton rather ingeniously linked 0 hours contracts and coronavirus, which I think he does deserve a bit of a medal for, but we're widening it out a little bit. We've already heard from Nia and Dean. Let's hear from Harriet next.
Yeah, I'm not sure which part to answer first, but I mean, in terms of the coronavirus, in terms of perspective, I think there have been 8,000 people who've been tested so far. 15 people or is it 15 people in the UK have been found positive, and of course they're isolated. But Ben, raises a very, very valid question for really any kind of sickness. And if you're self-employed or if you're one of the, many millions of people who run their own business in this country, these are the kind of issues that can affect you because you won't have the benefit of a contract and sick pay and so on and so forth. And so I think that's why we have a welfare state. That's why we have a safety net. What we've tried to do in terms of the reforms that have been brought in over the last decade to universal credit is to create a strong safety net, but also one that doesn't create disincentives to people to take on more work. And we also brought in a change to the law on 0 hours contracts specifically, so that you could not be forced by your 0 hours employer to only work for them. In other words, you had the freedom of choice to take on other employers.
And has that worked?
it's I think a very sensible reform, and as you point out, it's a small part of the market. I think in terms of the point around illness, it's about making sure that if you're on a 0 hours contract, that your package of benefits, your safety net, as it were, is there and reflects the fluctuating hours that you do, and that if you do additional hours, that you get paid for those additional hours. And that's been the whole point of the reform around universal credit.
Matt, you're an actor, and I guess you kind of qualify as a
0 hour contract. Yes,
the whole year long sometimes.
Sometimes. I mean, if I got I've got a show on next week. If I got coronavirus this weekend, there'd be a lot of money I'd have to pay to the Vault Festival back. But there are, as the caller said, it's the idea of people on 0 hour contracts getting coronavirus and having to self-isolate, and as a result, losing a lot of salary. And there are people out there. A friend of mine went along to the bus conference, where there was that outbreak, and everybody that went to that had to self-contain. And his housemate, who is a builder and on a 0 hours contract, had to move out, didn't come home that evening because he just couldn't run the risk of having to self-isolate for 2 weeks. And there are, again, the issue with 0 hours contract is people do go along to claim their job seekers allowance, and one of the things you have to do is you have to tell them that you've been looking for work, that you've been to interviews, and if you go for an interview and they offer you a job and you don't take it, then you have your benefits stopped. So if you're offered a 0 hours contract, you have to take it, otherwise you don't get your job seekers allowance. You then take the role for 0 hours, you get coronavirus, and you lose your job. And there are many people. I mean, I'm hopefully I'm the only person here that still worries about paying their rent, and I think it's a genuine worry, and it's a very valid question. Is there more support that we should be giving? Of course.
Well, in order to help you pay your rent, you skillfully got in a mention of your show then. Just tell us exactly what it is, when it's on and where.
It's called Sequins and Lies. It's on at the Vault Festival next week from the 3rd to the 8th, and it tells the true story of I have 2 half-brothers that didn't know I existed until I was former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. So, yes, true story.
I already want to come and see it.
See, yeah, that's the hook. That's the hook.
And how did they find out?
There was a review in the Times, and it said Tedford in drag, and there aren't many Tedfords.
No, that's not a usual name.
Not a very usual name. So it's about that and about my relationship with my father. I was going to call it Daddy Issues, but we went with Sequins and Lies instead. Also, Papa Can You Hear Me, because there's a lot of Barbara Streisand in it. So yes, it's all singing, all dancing.
Well, if anybody's seen your Margaret Thatcher Queen of Soho show, they kind of... I mean, I'm guessing it's rather different to that, but...
It's she's mentioned, but I don't have to shave my legs for this show, so I'm quite looking forward to it.
We might even have a little bit of the voice later on in the programme. Right, Ben, thank you very much for that. Let's go to Neil in Bromley. Neil, what would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask, really, if the panels think that if the government should take any responsibility whatsoever for the lack of doing anything, for example, like flooding, with the climate change we're having, there's obviously going to be things that are going to be cropping up from time to time, and for basically poor advice to people who may subsequently, with this coronavirus, become ill and been unable to work, or people that have suffered from some disaster because there hasn't been adequate protection and lose their job or find themselves uninsurable in the house and no longer can they insure themselves. Does the government not have to take some sort of financial responsibility for the lack of care that it shows to people if it's been evident that there needs to be something done?
Well, again, you've linked quite a lot of issues there together, but I think that the link is government culpability. It kind of returns to what we were talking about in flooding. I mean, for example, when all of the houses were built by... John Prescott famously gave huge amounts of planning permissions for houses to be built on floodplains. Should the government, therefore, be responsible for the consequences of that? Harriet?
Well, I think the government can take action to address some of those issues. We've had a long discussion about the amount that's been put into flood defences per se, but there's also flood re. So this is re for reinsurance. It was set up to help properties that had flooded that could no longer get access to insurance. And I remember what a big issue that used to be in my constituency, and it's helped people whose properties are vulnerable to flooding, where the insurance companies were turning them down, by creating a reinsurance that can then take some of the risk. So that's the government using its own balance sheet to take some of the insurance risk. So I think those are the sorts of things that, yes, governments ought to be trying to do to help people to make sure that they can get insurance for their homes.
Matt?
Yes, it's the same thing we were saying before, but blaming the government for floods, I'm all for blaming Boris Johnson for a lot of things, and do they take responsibility for it? It's hard to, even I will say it's hard to put the blame on the government for something that I would say is an act of God.
But if you deliberately give planning permission for a housing estate on a floodplain, surely you have to take responsibility for that.
For that, completely. But however, I think that what we're going to be facing in a few years' time is not necessarily just floodplains that will be flooding. I think it's going to be a much wider issue that will start affecting areas that weren't traditional areas of flooding. So can we blame the government for that? Maybe not. If they didn't provide support and they don't provide action, then yes, of course. But the actual flooding itself, that's a...
Because, I mean, widening this out a bit, you could also argue that the government should be taking more responsibility for flood defences where there's a lot of coastal erosion on cliffs, where I live in Norfolk, that's a terrible issue, and people have lost their homes, and yet there doesn't seem to be any real scheme to provide people with compensation, because they say, well, you must have known that when you moved in. Well, yes, when we moved in, the government was actually defending the coastline, and it's now taken a decision not to. That's a problem, isn't it, Nia?
Well, I think absolutely. I do think people do expect government to intervene, and they do expect us as a society to decide, what do we spend our money on and how do we protect people. So, where clearly there are things that can be done, then people want to see that. I mean, if you take the coronavirus, we are expecting people to be kept in isolation. We're expecting precautions to be taken. People do have an expectation that there are responsibilities that we want to see government put into action. And I think that that's very important. And can I just say, if I may, just publicise something since Matt started it.
What are you appearing in?
I just want to say, and it may be only a minor thing, but if you lick the roof of your mouth, you can stop yourself sneezing. And this
I wasn't expecting that.
And
when
is
is this show on?
and you can stop yourself sneezing, or at least you can postpone it till you've maybe got off the bus, gone out of the room, got your handkerchief out. And it's not just coronavirus, but it's all sorts of flu and all sorts of things. So I just think it's a message. If everybody would like to share the message.
I'm trying it now.
We're all trying it.
Well, try it every time you're going to sneeze. Even when you're driving, it stops you closing your eyes when you sneeze.
In 10 years, I've never sneezed on this programme, but I nearly did a couple of weeks ago. Wow. I'm going to remember that. If the feeling ever comes back, I'm going to think of you.
I'm sure your guests will be very grateful if you do.
Dean, have I come to you?
I can't. You haven't come to me.
Right, let's come to you now.
I can't beat that ingenious low-tech solution. However, there is this broader, serious thing. This is, as has been noted by other panellists, this has come up before in this discussion about responsibility. Who's responsible? I'll give another illustration. It cuts across all sort of party divides and so on. The number of people who are encouraged to own diesel cars and then have had that pug, and the sense of, I don't want to say gilet jaune, anger, a sort of French style, but there is a real, sense that you were told to take a leap. And then to mix the metaphor, the rug was pulled away from it. I think one of the most important things, though, again, it's a question of political responsibility and wider accountability within society. The key thing is we have an open society. We have a debate on this, and we can judge whether Matt Hancock has put in the right level or not, the Labour shadow, Lib Dem, etc. They can question Hancock and hold his feet to the fire. I mean, what we're learning now, where this whole thing started in China, one of the biggest things is the lack of accountability there, the secretiveness, the protectionism on the kind of drugs that might have palliated this in the first place. And the first cracks, don't want to widen it massively beyond the caller's question, but the first crack in Xi's leadership in a very long time. And that's the key difference, is that we can, as it were, really question the professionals, question the politicians, and throw them out if we want to.
Great. Well, we've got time, hopefully, for 2 more questions. So let's quickly go to a break. It's 8:45.
LBC and its sister stations from Global come together to bring you...
And the winner is...
the Global Awards 2020 with very.co.uk.
Show your appreciation for LBC's Mr. Steve Allen.
With huge performances on the night from the Stereophonics, Alan Jones, Ellie Goulding and Russell Watson. Listen or watch Thursday the 5th of March from 5 p.m. to hear everything from this incredible awards night on Global Player. The Global Awards
2020. With very.co.uk.
LBC.
At
Lidl, we're always Lidl on price. This month, next month, every month. Our prices are always Lidl, and sometimes even littler. From tomatoes to tatties, chicken to chilies, from own brands to big brands. So you know your money will always go far. Now that's big on quality, and always Lidl on price. Subject to availability, selected stores, excludes NI.
30 years ago, George Bush Sr. announced the dawn of a new world order. And if you look at the news today, it seems that order is coming undone. I'm Thomas Small, a historian and Middle East expert, and with Eamon Dean, I host a podcast called Conflicted. Eamon, what are you exactly?
I used to be a jihadist, an MI6 spy, and now I'm a security consultant.
To hear us connect the dots behind recent events, listen to Conflicted wherever you get your podcasts.
Ross saved time and money by getting his MOT and service done together at QuickFit. So he decided to treat Emma to a little something.
Oh, thanks, babe. I knew you'd remember.
Of course he remembered. He doesn't know what yet, but that's just a detail. Book at quickfit.com or visit your local QuickFit today and drive away happy.
Heading to Leeds to see the grandparents. Little one's going to get spoilt rotten. If your trip is over a week away and you haven't booked your train ticket yet, that means you're in line to book LNER's Mighty Fine 29. It's only £29 each way from London to Leeds if you travel between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday to Saturday. Nan, we're on our way. Book direct at lner.co.uk. £51,229 seats available up to a week before travel. Standard advance fares on direct trains, subject to availability.
If you've lost money on a stocks and shares ISA sold by a bank or financial advisor, you may be due thousands in compensation. Text GOOD to 78900 and Goodwin Barrett will explain your options.
3, 2, 1, lift off!
What have you done with my OCT eye scanner? I'm supposed to be doing an eye scan with Mrs. Green.
We launched it, like you said.
Well, I meant launch it to the public, not on a rocket.
Oh.
Tell them how it takes a hospital-grade 3D image that could help detect eye conditions up to 4 years earlier.
Oh, sugar.
And that it's available at Specsavers.
Oh, and now also in outer space.
Introducing our most advanced eye exam with OCT scans. Search Specsavers OCT to find out more. Charge applies. OCT available at selected stores.
New Yakult Light is enriched with vitamin D and E.
Magically placed there by golden sunbeams, carried on the wings of ancient butterflies.
No. They're added by scientists and filled with Yakult's unique bacteria scientifically proven to reach the gut alive. Yakult, a little bottle of science, not magic.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 here on LBC. I'm going to ask for short answers to the next two questions. But keep your calls coming because we might squeeze another one in at the end. 0345 6060 973. Colin is from Brighouse in West Yorkshire. Hello, Colin.
Hello there. How are you doing?
All right.
My question is this. Once we decided to leave the EU, the first thing that Theresa May did was offer £13 billion to them. What my question has been for the last 3 years is what has happened to our assets within the EU over the last 45 years? We've ploughed money in over 45 years, and yet I've never heard any politician or any advisor mention the assets that we have within the EU that has been mentioned in a negotiation. That's my question.
All right. Dean.
Well, of course, getting our money back, as that's been the great theme of the whole EU debate. And, of course, it started, in its modern iteration with Thatcher in the early 1980s. And it's continued, through the periods of, debates on the single currency, ERM, etc. Where the argument, of course, and this is certainly not my position, but the argument of those who Eurocrats would be that we've been part of a club and we've therefore paid in our dues. Of course, we all know that we paid in massively in excess of our dues. We were a net contributor. And one of the reasons for the tremendous upheaval and the hostility to Brexit, of course, amongst much of the bureaucracy, is that our departure upends that entire system of payments that exists. And there will be countries, Republic of Ireland being one example, which will be a big loser. And, in some ways, I wasn't that hostile to the idea that Britain continues, that we sort of, as it were, make a decent financial offer to get out, if get out we indeed did. That, of course, debate was muddied under Theresa May's ministry, particularly after the 2017 general election. But I think, now we're getting out, and the real question, as we all know, is on what the terms of literally the free trade agreement are. And, what I think this government has shown is that if you stand firm, the debacle that's been predicted by so many of the naysayers hasn't actually come about, and that we can, stand our own ground on regaining control and a measure of national self-respect.
Okay, Nia?
Well, yes, it wasn't only Margaret Thatcher, was it, who made sure that we were trying to get the money back. Tony Blair was doing the same, getting the rebate. It's always been a discussion that we've had with Europe, but I think the difficulty now...
He gave away quite a lot of the rebate, didn't he?
Well, to be perfectly fair, I think we also did quite well on a number of issues in terms of our financial settlement with Europe. But I think the problem now is that we do need the very best of negotiations in order to make sure that we do unmuddle the intricacies that we are all joined up in, and that we do end up with a decent trade agreement. And I just hope that the tone of that changes from what we've heard this week, so that we can have something constructive. It's going to be a very, very tricky negotiation. I don't think it's going to be easy for either side.
Harriet Baldwin.
Well, the way I would look at it is that there is one bit of change that I think very significant chunk of change we get back, which is the capital that we had in the European Investment Bank. But the rest of it has been like paying your council tax every year. We've been paying in a tax effectively into the EU budget, and that's spent, I'm afraid. And it's like when you move house, you don't get a refund on the council tax you've already spent. And the amount that was agreed in the withdrawal agreement, the 39 billion, that was stuff that we had agreed to pay out while we were in the EU. So it was things like the example I always use is Peter Mandelson's pension, which is going to carry on for the rest of his life. And so there are some sort of tail obligations that will fade out over time. But you can't get back the money that you paid in while you were sort of paying it like a council tax.
Well, we're very lucky to have the ghost of Margaret Thatcher with us.
I want my money back. No, I think as the caller was talking about, basically, the money that we've paid into the EU, why aren't we getting it back? Where is it? And it's over there. They're using it. It's been, it wasn't money that we just popped into a savings account and then decided, well, actually, no, we don't want to be here anymore. We're going to take it with us. It's being used. It's being, we've invested in the infrastructure of Europe. And if it was a rugby club and you joined in and you decided to pay for the new bar being built, and then you decide you were no longer a member of the rugby club, you wouldn't be allowed to use the bar. It's as simple as that. So this idea of, I want my money back, where is it? Where is this money that we've given to Europe? Why can't we have it back? It's because it's being spent. And if you...
Well, the real answer to the question that Colin asked, surely, is that, the assets that we had were netted off. So it would have actually been much more than 39 billion, but they presumably then calculated it, taking into account the assets that we had invested over the years. At least that's what I assume happened. Colin, thank you very much for that. Let's have a text question. This says, does the panel see yesterday's inquiry report as a waste of money, or as Boris Johnson once called it, spaffed up the wall? Should Margaret Thatcher's statue be torn down as she turned a blind eye to the abuse? Harriet Baldwin.
I didn't see that reported in the inquiry about Margaret Thatcher, but I do think the inquiry has been valuable. It has shed some light. And,
it did talk about the case of Peter Morrison, didn't it, where they say she knew what his proclivities were and didn't do anything about it.
And I think it's shown some clarity on what was happening all those years ago. And so I think from that point of view, and certainly for the victims, it will have come as something that really has resolved many issues for them.
But in the sense that it said there was no organised Westminster paedophile ring, you think, well, all this money has been spent. Was it a waste of money?
Well, I think it's brought clarity and accuracy and truth to what, as you say, was a sort of fairly frenzied rumour mill. And so I do think that it's valuable to have had that truth come out.
Dean.
Well, we seem to swing between two extremes. On the one hand, in that period, perhaps the era of Cyril Smith, there were people sort of tiptoed around the issue, those kind of issues, much too gingerly. Now we're in a totally different culture where anyone like Carl Beach can come up and make accusations of such wildness and extremity that the police collapse like a pack of cards and just, and they're away with it, and all kinds of decent people, their last days of their lives are immiserated, their reputations, thrown into a very serious question. Cyril Smith, who's been on the front page, and obviously the issues around him are what led to David Steele's resignation from the Liberal Democrats and from the House of Lords. Cyril Smith was a most tremendous bully by all accounts of everyone I've ever spoken to him, threw his weight around, perhaps literally as well as metaphorically, and was a difficult person to handle, and it's now come, as it were, it's now come home to roost, as it were, and it's a sad end for David Steele's career. But I think that the victims, from that era deserve better, just as now so-called victims are believed unquestioned.
Okay. Matt Tedford, the real truth here is that politicians act in their own party's interest. The reason that David Steele didn't do anything about Cyril Smith, it was because it was in the aftermath of the Jeremy Thorpe scandal, and it would have been the death of the Liberal Party. Margaret Thatcher and her colleagues didn't do anything about Peter Morrison, even though they knew, because they knew that it would be to the detriment of their party's reputation. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Simple. I mean, there are lots of reasons to tear down the statue for Margaret Thatcher, and this is just another one to throw on the pile, really. Obviously this is horrific, and I think we need to listen to survivors of sexual abuse and see what they, I don't think tearing down Margaret Thatcher's statue, did she turn a blind eye? Yes, she did, and that's, raised a lot of questions, and we need to look into that further, but it's a very complicated issue when it comes to victims of sexual abuse, and I'm never quite sure where to place myself on.
Okay. Nia.
Well, absolutely vital to have had that inquiry, both for the victims, but also going forward, hopefully to act as a deterrent in future, that people are not going to be able to get away with things like this. But I think the whole issue is very much tied up as well with who was in Westminster at the time. Obviously, not being there, I can't talk about the culture, but what I can tell you is that when the significant number of women became MPs, issues that women like to raise, concerns about the way that women are treated, a lot of these have become topics that have been discussed and talked about. And I think there was a culture previously that was in that horrible space of regarding the victims as asking for it, and this appalling type of attitude towards people that we have seen, and unfortunately has even in more recent times been quoted and used by people. So I think it's very, very important that we are changing that culture, and that we are absolutely clear going forward that this is totally unacceptable.
There's still a lot to do, like these non-disclosure agreements that cover up criminal activity. We've got to get those banned.
Well, thank you to all four of you for being with us for the last hour. If you've missed any of this programme, if you have missed any of our Cross Questions in the past, they're all available on the Cross Question podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcast from. So thank you to Dean Godson, Harriet Baldwin, Nia Griffith and Matt Tedford. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk coronavirus. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, around 160 British people at a coronavirus-hit hotel in Tenerife will now stay in lockdown for the next fortnight. The Foreign Office has been in touch with the group after 4 cases there. Several new diagnoses have been made across Europe.